Let us begin with this first section. First, we're going to have the introduction as to what this section is entirely going to be about. Then, again, like I've mentioned earlier, we're going to have the whys and the whats of food security so that the chapter becomes very clear in understanding. Post that, we will be seeing a new term called as famine. And what exactly is famine? We will be seeing the greatest famine that's occurred in India. Then we evaluate as to who are the people that are food insecure, who come under this category, and who to whom these schemes such as Antyodaya Yojana and the PDS and the buffer stock applies to. After that, we'll see the details on hunger as to what exactly is hunger and the different types of hunger, that is chronic hunger and seasonal hunger, and how India is progressing in this kind of a domain under hunger. So let's get on with this section. The brief overview. What exactly is food security? It is the 3 A's, right? The first A is availability, and the second A is the accessibility, and the third A is the affordability of all kind of food to all people at all the times. So the ones that need this kind of food basically in our country is India. In our country, is the poor people, and these poor people are more vulnerable, which means they are totally under the category of those that do not get food, and hence they are the food insecure people. That food security in India depends on the main system, right? That is also called as public distribution system and government's action at times when this kind of food security is threatened. So let's head on to what exactly is food security. Like I mentioned, it is the component of 3 A's. You have availability of food. So what exactly is availability of food? You are producing the kind of food within the country that we as citizens and people in the country will be able to consume for our daily living. We also get our foods in our country through something called as food imports. So what exactly is food imports? Food imports is that component where we are getting in food from the other countries into our country as a type of import, right? So suppose India lacks, suppose let's take an example that India lacks potatoes, right? So we can import potatoes from a country which is successful in producing a lot of potato. So that's what food imports is mean, and when we have these imports, it is automatically increases the availability of food that we have in our country. Also, every year our government stocks up some grains that are bought by the farmer, which is also called as buffer stock. So buffer stock is a continuous process. So last year, that is the year of 2021, whatever the government would have stocked up and is not sold in the market will continue for this year as well. So the previous year stocks are also there for the availability of food that is there in that will be given out to people in 2022. So that's exactly how it works. Then you have the second A, that is accessibility. What exactly is accessibility? Accessibility means that whatever food that is available in our country must be at reach to every other person. Every other person should get the kind of food that is available. And then we have the third A, that is affordability. What exactly is affordability? It is the cost machine of this food security, that where it implies that whatever food that is available and accessible should ultimately be affordable. That is, you have to have enough money to buy that kind of food product you want to consume, right? For you have a very basic and decent living in order to survive, you need to have that kind of an affordability where you can buy the basic food and have it for your consumption. So these are the basic 3 A's that are categorized under food security. Thus, food security is ensured in a country only if, first one, enough amount of food is available to all the persons, that is easily accessible. All persons have the capacity to buy food of acceptable quality. That means whatever food that is there should not be of bad quality. Ultimately, that is going to hurt the people itself, right? People are ultimately human resources, and hence we need to protect this kind of a resource. So we are not supposed to, give out bad quality food or infected or unadulterated food. So whatever food is being given now to people should be of good quality. And there is absolutely no stoppage to people accessing food. There is absolutely no barrier that's coming across them to get the food. They can easily go and get their food. So we have a Nobel laureate called Amartya Sen, and he added a new dimension to what food security. So, like I've said earlier, there were initially three dimensions, and Amartya Sen he added a fourth dimension. So he emphasized the access domain of the food security through what he called entitlements. So, what exactly is entitlements? It is a combination of what one can produce, exchange in the market along with the state, or other socially provided supplies. Also, this is a brief fun fact that I will be telling you out here. The 1995 World Food Summit declared that poverty eradication is a must to improve access to food. So, this summit announced that in order to improve the access to food, first you have to remove poverty. You have to remove it's a cause and a consequence to food insecurity. Now let us see why do we need food security in our country. I've also mentioned earlier that the most food insecure person in our society is the poor people, because they don't have the access, affordability, and the availability dimensions for them to get the food. Also, you should be aware that most of the poor people are those that are at areas which have a national disaster or a calamity, that can be like a drought or a cyclone which removes all their crops, and they have absolutely no kind of a home for them to like even start a livelihood, right? So you have to remember that these poor people are the most vulnerable sections. Also, let us see as to how is food security affected during a calamity. Let us take the example of a flood or a drought, right? Here we've considered a drought, so let us go ahead with the drought. So due to a natural calamity, say a drought, total production of food grains decreases. Why does it exactly decrease? You know that a drought is where there is no enough irrigation or water in order to produce the crops. So when there is no proper irrigation or water, the production of grains finally decreases. And definitely when the production decreases, there is a shortage of food grains in that kind of a society or a community. And hence, you should be knowing the supply and the demand graph, that when there is no supply of a food grain, the demand goes up. And as the demand goes up, it is very, very natural the price of that good also goes up. And when it is high price, again it is a very, very bad consequence, that everyone cannot afford that kind of food, and especially vulnerable people will not be able to afford that kind of food. Hence, when this calamity happens in a very, very large area, it affects a large number of people, and many people are left without any kind of food. So, finally, people tend to starve without food, and that ultimately leads to death. So, what exactly this term is called? It's called as starvation. So, this situation leads to the term called starvation. A massive starvation ultimately might become a famine. Starvation across many, many areas, covering a wide area and many people, finally turns out into a famine. Now, let us see what exactly is famine. It is characterized by widespread deaths due to starvation and epidemics, right? So, basically, why is it caused by? Because of bad quality food, bad quality water, and the kind of diseases. So, when you consume bad quality food and bad quality water, your immune system in the body automatically becomes very weak, and you lose that kind of resistance you have for any kind of diseases that are coming, such as typhoid, cholera. So this ultimately leads to starvation and finally death. So this exactly is what famine is. The most devastating famine that occurred in India was the basic famine that was not the basic, the Bengal famine that occurred in 1943. And a fact of that, this famine basically killed 30 lakh people in the province of Bengal itself. Just in this small area, it killed 30 lakh people. So you can understand the kind of such a big tragedy this might have been. And do you know who were affected by the most by this 1943 Bengal famine? It was against the most, again, the most vulnerable people that we have, that is the agricultural laborers, the fishermen who are right near the coast, and the transport workers, and many other laborers were affected because automatically the price of the rice and the cereals and daily consumption needs increased because of famine, and people could not afford it and ultimately starved to death. So, like we've seen, even in the case of COVID, right? There was a lot of food hoarding that was happening. Everyone wanted to go at once to supermarkets. Everyone wanted to pick up everything that they can. So, once the people who could access food had the opportunity to go buy everything, the people who could not access food, that is mainly the poor people, did not have any other food that was left to buy, right? So they finally became food insecure and they starved to death. So this is a basic example in the contemporary times of COVID. Hence, like you've seen earlier, food security is needed in a country in order to ensure food at all times, including calamities and pandemics. So who are the ones that are the most food insecure? So the worst affected groups are, first one being landless people with little or no land to depend on. These people have absolutely no property of their own and hence depend on the other people for their survival. You have traditional artisans such as potters, such as weavers, who don't have any kind of social security for them to, go ahead and buy the food grains for themselves. You have providers of traditional services, and you have petty self-employed workers that you can find some on the streets who are uh, towing vehicles carrying vegetables or fruits and etc., which is a daily sign you find every day. And then you have destitutes including beggars, and that's about it. So you also have this kind of a situation in the urban areas. So the food insecure families in the urban areas are those who are working members and are generally employed in ill paid occupations and casual labor market. The social composition, along with the inability to buy food, also plays an important role in food insecurity. So, what exactly is this? India is a vast society with different kind of divisions based on how the society perceive people. So, you also have the SC, the STs, the OBCs, the general category, and etc. SCs and STs have a historical impact as they were ill-treated in the past back in history. So you have the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes who are also given a lot of reservation facilities in the job and the employment sector so that they can be at par with the general section. And you also have the other backward classes. So these combining with so these people who are SC, STs and OBC, they have a very low societal status, and these are also often the people who have no land or absolutely no kind of social security for them to lead a dignified life. So these are hence more prone to food insecurity. And also the people affected by natural disasters. So let me give you an example. The coastal areas that are adjacent to Bay of Bengal or Arabian Sea, Let us consider Bay of Bengal, because Bay of Bengal has more kind of cyclones when you compare it to Arabian Sea. So people living there are um, in the period from October to December, since there are a lot of cyclones at that time, they lose out on shelter, they lose out on food, and they lose out on the basic necessities of life itself. So these people automatically become very, very food insecure. Pregnant and nursing mothers and the children under the age of 5 years also, when belonging to the poorer class, that is below that are those people that belong to the below poverty line, are also food insecure. According to the National Health and Family Survey 1998 to 1999, the number of such women and children is approximately 11 crore. So, this is a massive amount, and hence, this issue needs to be addressed at the national level. Also, the kind of food insecurity that we have in India, it is very disproportionately distributed, which means one state might have high food insecurity, and then the other state might have a very low percentage of food insecure population. So what are those areas which have a high percentage of food insecurity? Those states which are economically backward and they have high rates of poverty. So this is one of those states. Then, like I've said, tribal and remote areas. So these are the areas where scheduled tribes even reside. So these areas usually lack, they're illiterate, they're poor, they're landless, and hence are more vulnerable. And those regions which are more prone to natural disasters, that you can say as areas without necessary irrigation, or areas that is more prone to heat, areas that is more prone to earthquakes, tsunamis, areas that is more prone to cyclones, and etc. So let us see briefly as to how they are categorized. You have Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, parts of Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, and they account for the largest percentage of food insecure people in the country. You should note that Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand are among the top three with the highest poverty rates, and hence poverty is correlating with food insecurity. Hunger, like I've said, is the main aspect which relates to food insecurity. You have food, food goes along with hunger, right? It's the antonym of hunger. So that's the most basic aspect. Hunger is not just an expression of poverty, it brings out poverty as a whole. And the when you can say, when you can tell that a country is working for that particular country's food security, that means that you need to firstly rule out hunger there, and all the kind of consequences that hunger brings. And hunger is divided into two portions, two dimensions, that is first being the chronic hunger and the second being the seasonal hunger. Let's go on with chronic hunger. Chronic in basic terms means for a longer period of time, for an extended period of time, okay, and not for a shorter time, right? So it is a consequence of diets, that is the kind of food that you consume, persistently inadequate in terms of quantity and quality. That is, there is less amount of food that goes on with quantity, and the quality is very bad. So that's what and it leads to hunger. And poor people suffer from this kind of chronic hunger naturally, because they do not have any kind of income to buy the food, and hence they starve to death ultimately. Then you have the seasonal hunger. What exactly seasonal hunger? It's the opposite of chronic hunger, where hunger occurs at short intervals at different seasons, right? So it is related more with the agricultural sector, because in agriculture you have a season for growing and you have a season for harvesting. And so this season for harvesting becomes uh, a case scenario where food is available, but when the season for growing is there, there is not enough food that's available in the market. So that is when you have seasonal hunger in the cases of agricultural sector. And you should also know, in rural areas agricultural employment is extremely high. So in the rural areas it's highly prevalent, this kind of hunger. And also in urban areas, casual laborers undergo this kind of hunger because, let's take an example. Suppose construction, there's a kind of construction activity that's happening. Once the construction is happening and it starts to rain, it becomes very tough for the laborers to work. Except when it is for the curing time, it does not matter. But before the curing time, whenever there is rain, it becomes, the soil becomes very hard for it to sustain in the, I mean, keep the foundation intact and etc. So it becomes very hard for the laborers to go on with the construction. Hence, for that particular season of rains, they are not able to go ahead with any kind of construction activities. India is aiming at self-sufficiency in food grains since independence, that is the 1950s. So India wants to be able to produce the food grains and sustain the entire population of billions with the food grains that our country produces. So that is what self-sufficiency means, which also means that we are not going to depend on any kind of imports, but we are going to produce that kind of food grain as to what we want, and we are going to consume that ourselves. So let us see the progress that India is uh, doing in order to reach this state of self-sufficiency. Like I've mentioned earlier, there is one major project that India had taken up, that is Green Revolution, and it has yielded very good results. So Green Revolution correlates a lot with the production of HYV seeds, that is high yielding variety seeds, and these seeds are for the production of wheat and rice. So this is one of the progress. And looking at the great results, the great positive outcomes that Green Revolution even came about with, Indira Gandhi, our Prime Minister back then, named it the Wheat Revolution in July 1968. But whatever the outcome that took place back then, the positive outcome, whatever was there, was very disproportionate, which means very few places like Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh fared well, and very few places, other places in South India did not fare well. So that ultimately led to some kind of inequality. So this is a brief graph which is explaining the production of food grains in India in million tons, right? So on the y-axis you have the production in million tons, and on the x-axis you have the year of production. So you can briefly see from the time of Green Revolution to the time of 2019 to 2020, the persistent gradual increase that has happened. In between there was a slight decrease, but yet again it has increased. So this is definitely a positive outlook.